This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 25. Today's episode is sponsored by Nicole Burgess, Empowerment Mentor. She's helping women remove their good girl mask and the people-pleasing behaviors and let their authentic and powerful spiritual self arise. For more information, go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com. Now here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I am so excited about sharing this episode today with my guest, Jodie Gale. I love her sharing her vulnerability regarding the process that she has gone through in overcoming her own eating disorder, how it changed her life, and the work that she is now doing that is impacting so many other people in our world. I really appreciate her also sharing at the very end her dream of meeting somebody very special and how she didn't give up on that dream and it happened. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Now here it is. I am so excited about this upcoming conversation. My guest today is Jodie Gale, and she is a soul-centered psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, and an eating psychology coach. She is a leading specialist in women's emotional, psychological, and spiritual health and well-being. Jodie has a wealth of personal and professional experience and knowledge in the field of addiction and eating disorders. She is the disordered eating consultant for Byron Private Rehab, a former assistant clinical director at Sydney Eating Disorder Outpatient Treatment Center, and an approved service provider for the South Pacific Private Addiction and Mood Disorder Treatment Center, and she's currently in a postgraduate training and supervision with the founder of Monte Treatment Center, Carolyn Costin. Jodie works in private practice treating eating disorders as well as other women's issues in Manly on the northern beaches of Sydney, Australia. She really works from a transpersonal trauma perspective, meaning that she sees the eating disorders as a highly creative way to deal with underlying complex trauma and childhood emotional neglect. And it's all framed within something that's much deeper and spiritual and seeking to emerge out of the client's symptoms, meaning their eating disorders. Jodie, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today, so thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Nicole. Hi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Could you share a little bit more with all of our listeners, like really what got you into this whole eating disorder and really addiction issues and really working from this even perspective that you had? What got you into this work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my own personal history was with an eating disorder and addiction. And I guess, you know, if I look back to my early childhood, by the age of 5, I was already suffering with body image issues. And by 8 years old, I was dieting already. And by 13, I had bulimia. So came from a what you would call, I guess, a dysfunctional family system, and which I now know to be complex trauma and early childhood emotional neglect. And, you know, a history of both parents having food and weight issues. And so by the time I was sort of 13 at an all-girls school, it really just sort of took off, and that started with dieting. So I remember my first diet ever was the Beverly Hills diet, and from that was when the first time I ever purged my food after, you know, I'd been restricting, and then had bulimia. So, and it just sort of went from there, really. And then when I was 18, 19, I started using amphetamines, and that was perfect for my eating disorder life, because it helped me restrict even further, and moved to London and led quite a hedonistic lifestyle there for many, many years. And then woke up one day and thought, oh, okay, this is not good. And I kind of ignored that. And then I had been working in a crystal shop in Covent Garden and reading about swimming with wild dolphins. And I thought, I might go and do that. And so off I went to Ireland and swam with Fungi, the wild dolphin, in Dingle Harbour. And I had a peak, what Maslow would call a peak spiritual experience. And that was really the impetus for my recovery, because I'd had this sort of natural high and this sense of oceanic oneness and everything will be okay. And I went back to London and sought out therapy shortly after. And I just happened to come across my therapist, who happened to be a psychosynthesis psychotherapist. And she didn't pathologize my swimming with fungi. It was, we use that in the therapy a lot. So in terms of helping me recover from my bulimia and addiction.
Wow.
So that's where it all started.
That just left me in awe, because I'm sitting there thinking, what an incredible spiritual experience that moment. And it really was your pivotal point of doing
absolutely.
Something different. Wow.
And not just swimming with fungi, but the town itself, there are lots of spiritual people that go there. So I was like in my, I think I was about 24, 25 at the time. And, just meeting a whole heap of other people there who I just really connected with. And it was the first time I really felt that sense of connection. And I was like a backpacker at the time, and I remember these people paid for me to upgrade from the hostel into a nice room with a bath. And I couldn't believe that someone would treat me like that. So, lots of good experiences from this one experience, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, what came up was, that being open to receive that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing just a little bit, what is the definition of bulimia, first and foremost, in case our listeners are not aware of that is one of the so-called diagnoses within the eating disorder world, but kind of what that means?
Okay, so look, I don't really work to the DSM, so I couldn't exactly tell you the exact criteria for that.
Okay.
But the way that I know it and how I work with people is that people usually start by restricting, so dieting or more severe restricting, and then purging afterwards. So that purging is usually throwing up their food. But for other people, it could include taking laxatives. It could include like an exercise addiction. So to fit into the DSM, I think it has to happen so many times within a certain period. But, not everyone falls into that criteria. But to me, they would still have bulimia because they're still binging and purging.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So now I'm going to kind of twist it just a little bit, or turn just a little bit, share a little bit more, when you talked about the psychosynthesis, what is that? And I know you've got some training in that as well. So could you describe kind of what that is and really how, not just how it helped you, but how maybe you incorporate some of that into your work as well?
Sure. So, like I said, my therapist was a psychosynthesis psychotherapist. When I started seeing her, I had no intention of being a therapist. I just needed help. But what I loved about that and the way that she worked, like I said, it wasn't pathologizing. So quite often what she would do, we have what we call an external unifying center, which is usually the therapist, and that helps the client in their journey to recovery. And, she'd use things like fungi, the dolphin, as the external unifying center. She'd say things like, would fungi worry about what he looks like? Do you think he worries about what he eats? And I was like, of course not, So the fact that these sort of experiences were included in the therapy, that really spoke to me because it wasn't overly prescriptive and clinical. And then I went off to the Institute of Psychosynthesis in London, and they trained under Assagioli back in the must have been the 60s or the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I did their fundamentals of psychosynthesis, and it was just life-changing. It was one sort of spiritual experience after another in a way. And then after about 2 or 3 years in my personal therapy, I decided to go back with them and train I decided to do the training for personal development.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I got to year 3 or 4, that's when I decided that I really wanted to move into being a therapist. So the training takes about, by the time you do your client hours, about 8 years in total. But So it's a psycho-spiritual psychotherapy, or could also be called a transpersonal psychotherapy. And what that means is that we kind of look at the psyche on 3 levels. So the basement, the ground floor, and the loft. So in the basement, we use a lot of the sort of psychoanalytic techniques. Ground floor would be Gestalt, here and now sort of work. And then in the loft, it would be Jungian, psychosyntheses and other spiritual sort of therapies. So what you're doing, you're looking at a holistic model of the psyche where you dip in and out of any one of these areas within every session, really.
Beautiful.
Yeah, working with clients, we're always looking to see that the symptom, whatever the person's coming with, manifestation of something deeper seeking to emerge. So we don't just seek to eradicate the eating disorder, for example.
Yes.
We would look to find the value, meaning, and purpose of the eating disorder or whatever other symptom the person comes with.
And I love that approach because it's so much like what you're talking about, where it's not pathologizing what is going on. It's like really what sometimes we say is the root of the issue. And what you're saying, it's going so much more within the person. It really is, that self-discovery, right? The soul work.
Yes, absolutely. And, we were, before you started recording, we were talking about psychosyntheses and subpersonalities. Mm-hmm. And that's even that, if you look at sort of 80s rehab sort of recovery work, the victim, rescuer, and perpetrator, there was always this sort of thing like you need to get rid of these parts. But in psychosynthesis, we would look that each one of these parts of us carries like this gem of soul and spirit, and therefore we're seeking to have this realize in the person. We're not seeking to get rid of it.
Yes, that's so much what I tell my clients too. It's like, no, let's stay in that place of curiosity. And what information are they wanting to tell us or share with us, and being able to kind of maybe sometimes even have different personalities kind of, or subpersonalities, talk with one another so
Absolutely.
that they kind of gain this more of an inclusiveness versus trying to exclude one another. Yeah, like what you're saying is like, oh no, we got to totally get rid of it. It's like, no, that's all part of who you are.
Exactly. I mean, I often have them, one of their sub-personalities sort of, we're sitting in the therapy room, I'll have that part knock at the door, and it's usually the part they don't like the victim or something like that. And I'll say, how would you answer the door? And they're like, go away. And I'm like, oh, how do you think that part might feel if you tell it to go away?
Yes.
And one client said, oh, what do you want me to do? Welcome it in and give it a cup of tea?
Yes.
Like, yes. That's exactly what we need to do. So.
Yeah. And I think that's part of too, when we're working with trauma, it's also being able to shine a little light. I guess that's the best way I want to say this is on that shame piece, to say like, let's no longer grow the shame, which really stops our growth. Let's talk about it, and then have that self-compassion that you really are a whole person. Yeah. Right? Versus, you can only like this one little part of me. It's like, no, I can like the whole, all parts of you, and it's all okay.
Exactly. And, especially working with eating disorders. And first of all, I would always say to someone, look, right now you might not like this part, but let's at least work towards accepting that it exists in you.
Yes.
And we'll get to know it over time. So.
And I like the gentleness with that, right? Because it's like these small steps. It's taking small steps for our own self-acceptance and inclusion of all of these different parts. So I love that.
Absolutely.
How do you help, how do you help women then as they're kind of taking these steps into getting to know themselves better and going deeper into really what has that deeper cause for their eating disorder? What are steps that you take, or what are things that you also teach or guide them regarding kind of the self-care piece as they're also doing this? So like when they're in between the coaching sessions or in between the sessions, what are some
Yep.
of the things that you share with them?
Yeah, look, I work in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is based on my own training, my own long-term weekly therapy. And actually, I was in therapy between 1 and 3 times a week for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm a mother through foster care. So I, for the last 10 years, have done a lot of reading around parenting from an attachment perspective and reparative parenting, not just parenting, and more applying this to my work. I mean, part of my psychosynthesis training was in attachment theory, so I've always used that. But for me, the healing works with people through that long-term, weekly therapeutic relationship. And in a way, what I'm doing is, I mean, some people are a bit anti this expression, but it is about reparenting these young girls into, being able to have the capacity to take care of themselves. Because, if you give them an exercise, go home and take care of yourself, and someone's in a place of complete self-neglect and self-abuse, which is where they are, that's, it's not going to work. So what happens over time is, and especially, a little bit about psychosynthesis. So Anne Gieler and John Furman wrote the book The Psychotherapy of Love, and they talk about loving the client to bits, and it's an empathic love.
Yes.
And this is how, in my opinion, people grow to love themselves, and it's through experiencing that love in the therapeutic relationship. Once that has happened, then you can start giving them bits and pieces around self-care and self-compassion and self-acceptance and all that kind of stuff. And that's mirrored through how I treat the client.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was smiling because I'm like, oh, I even remember them talking about that again before you and I started to record. I was saying how they were my grad teachers in grad school. And we really talked so much about that empathic love in the room with the client. Yes. And it is so much of that mirroring back. And like you're saying, it's like if you're not in that place to really, and I do agree with that term of reparenting, whether I get some people don't, but there is reparenting those parts. And
yes, absolutely.
When you come from that, when you role model to them, it also, it hits those different mirror neurons, right? So they're seeing that reflected back, so that then they are more able to do that as that work continues. So
absolutely. My actually, she's a psychosynthesis psychotherapist as well. She trained in New Zealand. Her name's Tricia Stratford. She did her PhD research on empathy in the brain, and I was one of her research therapists. And every time the client felt empathy and I felt empathy towards the client, both of our brains are lighting up in the same place. So, there's evidence to support that this is actually what happens when you love and feel empathy and compassion for the client. So
that is so cool.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anything that we talk about the brain and being able to measure some of these things now, I find it just absolutely amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah, how we're coming along these days and showing how it's like we're all so intricately connected.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think sometimes people have a hard time believing that, but for me, it's like, well, there's a lot of energy that gets us connected to one another. But then when our brains really do light up, it's like now you're seeing the actual evidence through the scans of what is going on as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Cool. How do you, I guess for those then that as you're working with women and going deeper, really kind of, again, it's the mind, body, soul connection, right? We talk about that transpersonal piece of it. What are some of the ways that have helped women, I guess, over the years as they've healed, for lack of a better kind of, I guess, term right now, but how they've become more whole and accepting themselves? What are some maybe spiritual practices that get kind of incorporated into the work and for them as they move forward, as they go on and maybe graduate the program? I don't know how you do it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I work I work in two ways. Firstly, in long-term psychotherapy, and people will work weekly until they end. And then I have my soul sessions, which is a 6-week package where it's doing short-term work around like a visualization and art therapy exercise. So once, I guess throughout the therapy, more so weaving into the therapy, we're always using things like Assagioli's body feeling mind exercise, which is around letting people have an experience that they are separate from their mind, they are separate from their feelings, they are separate from their body, but they are also connected to those. And so they gradually, over time, build their soul self. That's the term Carolyn Costin uses for it, or we would say in psychosynthesis, our spiritual self. And so we're gradually doing that over time, and having experience of that. And, I guess as the background for everything, I like that expression, whatever your soul calls for, do that. And that will be different for every person. So, for some clients that might be a yoga practice. For others, I've got a couple of clients at the moment with a Kundalini practice. Here where I live, we're very close to the sea and the bush, so some people love bushwalking. Me personally, I used to love going to 5 Rhythms dance classes. We don't have any where I live here, so it's a bit annoying. But, so moving, and this is one of the things I'm teaching women, and I studied with the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, and they've got a really lovely way of talking about things, and that nutrition and exercise are from the masculine, and nourishment and movement are from the feminine. So I'm always weaving this masculine and feminine, and really teaching people, instead of this excessive exercise thing that we go on, how about moving your body in ways that you love? And so it's really about helping befriend the body through spiritual practice as well. And that might, again, walking, dance, yoga, meditation. So for other people, it might be prayer. It really, I don't work with anyone Indigenous at the moment, but, maybe if I was working with someone Indigenous, it might be around connecting with the land. And for other people who are into eco-psychology, it could be that too. So it really depends on each person.
Well, and I love you making that point too, Jodie, that it's really, again, when we reconnect with all of our different parts, but that soul self, that spiritual self, it's giving yourself permission to go, what does call you? What really suits you versus, well, so-and-so does this, and so over there does that. It's like, that's fine. They can do the yoga. They can do the, walking in the bush, but what calls you?
Yes.
And because
look, I've tried to meditate for years and years and years, and oh my God, I just I still just don't get it. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. But for me, I love moving and dancing, and for me, swimming laps is meditative. And maybe I am meditating, in the lap swimming. But for me, just swimming up and down the pool, some people would find that so boring. But for me, I've done that since I had a backyard pool growing up, and I count. 1, 1, 1, 1 for the first lap, and then 2, 2, 2, and so it just shuts everything else out, and I just love that. So
I have a friend of mine who says the exact same thing. She said, when she swims laps in the pool, it is very meditative for her. It's like the calming salve for her soul, and it really does, like, in a way, it kind of washes whatever's going on off, and you just are in that flow. And so, and
just being held by the water for me is so holding. Soothing.
Absolutely. And to me, it's like, if you've got the ocean so close to you too, that would make sense, right? Because it's also part of you.
Oh,
right?
Exactly. Oh, I love swimming in the ocean. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, lovely. So I'm really curious. I'm going to kind of switch just a little bit here. And I know there's some questions that I had asked you, and you had answered them. And I love this one that you had talked about, where I had asked, what's something maybe you have feared prior to getting to where you are today, and how did you overcome it or work through it? Would you mind sharing your answer?
Sure. Yeah. I'd say in the last sort of, 10 years, that would certainly be around my professional self.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was only telling a client yesterday, I remember going to this CBT training course maybe about 8 years ago, and it was full of young male 22, 23-year-old psychologists, and they were all like charging $280 an hour, and here I was on my measly $100 an hour, and I'm sitting there with like 20 years experience, and I came home and said to my husband, oh my God, my self-worth is so bad. Still chronic low self-worth manifesting in my work, because these young guys, like, they're not even out of training, 1 or 2 years out of training, and they're and so I got myself a coaching session, and I went about changing my website, and I really started to put myself out there, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to start blogging, and that means, what are all these other therapists going to think? And then I thought, hang on, I'm not trying to get therapists as clients, I'm trying to get clients as clients, So I kind of just bit the bullet. There was National Psychotherapy Day coming up, I think, and I thought, okay, this is a good topic to blog about. I'm passionate about psychotherapy, so I started my little blog series called Therapy Rocks. I just started to blog about that, and, when I'd come up with, like, I'd see people doing these amazing things in their business, and you obviously got to envy, and then I thought, envy is so useful. Instead of getting down on myself, what do I need to do in order to manifest this or get to where this person is? Not sort of going to comparison, but how do I get there? How do I do that? And so I'd use that every time I had that experience of feeling really bad about myself. Okay, what's really going on here? What do I need to do here? So...
Well, and I love it's that reframe. It's like, who can I emulate in that sense? Again, not trying to compete or be like them, that per se, but, upping your business level, that part of you, and going, okay, what can I do? And I love how you continue to take action steps, which really fights the fear of the imposter syndrome. Every time we go to that growth edge, that's going to be there.
Oh, of course. And too, I especially in the eating disorder field, I practice in a very different way from most people, and I quite often I've been attacked online by there's a group of, I won't say who it is, but there's a group of certain models, their parents, and they do not like to talk about anything to do with early childhood emotional neglect. And so whenever you write a blog or you write about it online, the whole, like, the world's worth of these mothers come and start attacking you, and it's like,
wow.
So I don't work from a mental illness model. I don't work from the medical model. And, it's still a bit woo-woo to talk about spirituality sometimes. Yeah. So it's really hard sometimes to put yourself out there when you don't subscribe to those dominant models. But for me, and knowing my own treatment, way back when, someone's got to keep doing it, and people who do work differently have got to keep doing it, because at the last eating disorder conference I went to, I actually left halfway through the day, and I thought, I'm going to stab myself in the head with a fork. Like, this is so it was all just acronym based therapy. There was no sort of soul, but no variation. Variation. It was all this clinical, and not everyone subscribes to that. That works for lots of people, and that's okay. But there are also a lot of people out there that's not working for. Right. So it's really about, for me, pushing the boundaries with that and thinking I have to keep putting that out there, because, this is obviously speaking to people, and other people need it. So.
Well, and I think sometimes, right, if the other people, as I know Brene Brown talks quite a bit about, being in the arena versus in kind of the bleacher seats.
Exactly that. And that's how my life feels most of the time.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about too, right, I see a craving, in a sense, for tapping into that more spiritual practices, the more spiritual work. I think there's been so much that it's like we have to cut that part off or parts away. Like somehow it's not okay, because whether they're taboo topics or they're sensitive topics, and yet I see people over and over, especially women that I work with, that really they crave being able to go to that deeper place.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think we do a disservice in our world if we're saying, oh, we don't want to go there, and it can only be taught by these specific, like the medical model, it's like, okay, I do it due to this, licensure piece over here, but I know I can also add onto these other components because that treats the whole person.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree.
Wow. It's amazing though, how there's still to me, and when the critics come out, oftentimes what I see underneath that is just so much fear of different, fear of not understanding, fear of, does that mean I need to change?
Well, that's, when I look at this, this example that I shared, absolutely. There's a, I think, does this mean I need to change? Because when I work with eating disorders, I actually would like to get rid of that term altogether in a way, because to me, they're actually family disorders.
Yes. But I love that, Jodie.
It's the child that's pathologized. And if we were to really look at what's going on here, the whole family system, everyone in this system needs help.
Yes.
It's the child that's expressing that through their eating disorder. So
yes. Okay, you need to keep fighting for the name change, because I really love that, because it totally is. It's a very much of a system, a family system disorder that is going on. So yeah, I think that would be a great rename. Okay, so now you've gone through all this incredible training, you've been doing this incredible work, and you're standing in your own truth, and you're standing for your clients on a lot of different levels. A couple years ago, you had this I was just like, oh my gosh, you had this really incredible, I think an incredible experience, because you got to meet somebody. And because when I had asked, who inspired you, you said you got to meet Oprah Winfrey. And I'm like, what's going on? So would you mind sharing a little bit about that experience?
Oh my God, there's nothing I love more than talking about Oprah. Of course. Yes, so look, I remember bunking off school, as a teenager. I was a very rebellious, angry, traumatized teenager, and I used to live in the same street as the high school. So I used to leave at lunchtime, and then I would go home and watch Oprah in my lunch break and then go back to school. Uh-huh. And so I watched the Oprah show for 25 years. When I moved to London, it wasn't on there, so my mum used to video record it for me, and then I'd binge watch it when I came home, so the original Netflix. And and then when I moved back to Australia, my husband and I were going through IVF, and so I wasn't really working a lot while we were doing that. I was very depressed, going through a major sort of existential crisis and a career crisis, having moved home, needing to start a practice again. And the light of my day was sitting down and having lunch with Oprah. And then she announced that the show was ending, and there was this application to be an ultimate viewer. So I applied for that, and I was interviewed for that. They ended up going with a couple of other people, so I missed out, and I was absolutely devastated because I wanted to go and see her live and obviously meet her. And then I won tickets the night before, so I did get to see her then. That was when she came out to Sydney the first time. And then 2 or 3 years later, she came back and you could buy VIP tickets. So I begged my husband, and when I told him how much they were, he stormed out of the house and went and sat in the car for 5 minutes. I don't want to repeat what he said. But put it this way, there were a few swear words in there. And then he came back and he said, once in a lifetime, why not? And I was like, yay! So
yes.
I went online and booked my ticket and went and bought myself a beautiful Camilla top, because Oprah loves Camilla, and off I went and drove myself over there, and I was so excited I forgot my shoes. I'm driving in my Crocs, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot my shoes. I had to go home, get my shoes. And then went through the VIP experience where there was about 100 people, and she came out for a sound check. It was meant to be for 15 minutes, and she ended up being there for about an hour. And I was one of the 6 people that got to ask her a question. And so I literally had a 20-minute conversation with her around one of the guests on her show, which was around a client who had actually died of anorexia. And she had said to everyone, I just want to tell you about the person that Jodie here is talking about, and that this person changed the way she worked on the show. She had a profound impact on her. So, we had a little chat with each other, and it was amazing. And then we got to, everyone got to have a photo with her. So, which, every year I call it my Oprah-versary. And a couple of other friends who were also there on the night, we all get excited every year. Oh, my God, we still can't believe we met Oprah. So.
That is an incredible experience. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us too. Because I just think that's absolutely amazing. It was on your radar for so many years. I really want to meet her, and you made it happen.
The number of times this show changed my life, I just thought, why am I even thinking about the silly amount of money for it? This is, I don't know if she'll ever come back to Australia. I don't,
Right.
So I just have to go for it. And I did. And I still don't regret it. And I say to my husband, it's the number 3 highlight of my life. Firstly, marrying him, then getting our kids through foster care, and then Oprah.
Sweet. That is awesome. Well, Jodie, I think I could truly have hours of a conversation with you, but I know we need to wrap up. So I'm curious, is there anything else that you wanted to share that maybe I skipped over, or anything else that you just want to kind of put out there to our listeners about, whether it's psychosynthesis or getting treatment for eating disorders? Then I will have you definitely share your contact information for the best way for people to find out more about you or get a hold of you, go from there.
Yeah, I think just, if you are someone who is suffering with an eating disorder, keep looking for someone who really speaks to you and can love you to bits.
I love that. It's very powerful, because I think that is so true, that when you're taking the risk of getting that help that you need, it can feel very scary, and you do want to make sure it's a match for you. And I love, though, that finding somebody that will just love you to bits as you're doing the healing process, that Absolutely. It is so important, for sure.
Absolutely.
So how can our listeners find you? Again, I will put this in the show notes that they can find out on NicoleBurgessCoaching.com / and then I'll have the episode number on there. But how could they find you?
So I'm at jodiegale.com, JODIEGALE.com, and I am in the process of writing my ebook, which has been going on for some time. But when you've got small children, that kind of takes longer than when you don't. So if you sign up to my mailing list on there, as soon as it's finished, you will be the first to get a copy of that. And that's going to be about befriending the body. So that's my main place. I'm also on Instagram under Jodie Gale. So a few sort of personal things weaved in with eating psychology. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your personal journey, and just also the work that you do in our world, that it is so needed. I just appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your expertise.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's good to talk.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, I invite you to go out to iTunes and please leave an honest rating and review. In the podcast world, this really helps other women find the podcast, and they can see if it resonates with others out there. So I really appreciate all your support and leaving me a rating.